Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carly Webb, and welcome to our continuing series of Trans Awareness Week programming sponsored by the New Haven Pride Center. Today, we're talking about trans and sports, and that's been in the news somewhat, a great deal rather, in recent years. We've heard about a lot of controversy, lawsuits, legal action, but mixed in with that are uplifting stories of transgender people engaged in the human drama of athletic competition, not just at the big scale, but also at the small scale. The average person just going for their personal best. That person who feels secure enough and feels safe enough to walk in a gym, and other people who are trying to facilitate that more and more in fitness spaces. And at its core, just human beings striving to be a little bit better today than there were yesterday. Good afternoon again. My name's Carly Webb, and when I'm not moderating panels here at the New Haven Pride Center, I'm a competitive athlete, and I've been a sports journalist for more than a quarter of a century. Currently, I write for Outsports.com, the world's largest website dedicated to the coverage and issues surrounding LGBTQ athletes, coaches, trainers, and front office people. In fact, if you want to know more, Outsports.com. But today, I have a panel of 4 special people who are involved in athletics, involved in fitness, and have done a lot for themselves and have inspired others. And I'd like to introduce you to them right now. Patrick, bring them all in. They are a varied group of people. They're involved in fitness. They're involved in power sports. One of them has conquered a lot of mountains in the region, and one of them is a current competitive collegiate athlete at the Division III level in the NCAA. And they're all in front of you today, and I welcome this panel. And we're going to start by having each introduce themselves. And as you introduce themselves, I have a question for you. What about sports or fitness brings you joy? And actually, I want to start with the one next to me, Lee Brown from Sarah Lawrence College. Take it away.
Hello. So my name is Lee Brown, and I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. And let's see. I think the thing I enjoy the most is being part of a team. For me, I really get the most out of team sports. Although to get to the level of being on a team, you also have to push yourself as an individual. But I love being part of a team and working together with people, which is an interesting thing for a cross-country runner to say, as we're one of the most individual team sports there are. But I think there's a lot in just pushing yourself, but pushing yourself because you're pushing yourself for the team. Yeah.
Well, Lee, welcome to the panel. Next up, we've got a person who is no stranger at least to me for certain, and no stranger to a lot of people who've been following some of the issues involving sports and trans people. JC Cooper's in the house with us. JC, tell us about you and what brings you joy when you're on the lifting platform.
First of all, hi, I'm JC. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And like Carly said, I'm a competitive power lifter. I'm a 2-time national champion across 2 different sports, curling and powerlifting. I think the thing that brings me the most joy is really just encapsulating all of my identity through my body when I'm lifting. So really just being present and being there when I'm on the platform. And then kind of to echo what Lee was saying, being able to set personal goals and share that with others that are, working towards some of the same things. The community that's built through that those challenges is just something that you really can't put words to. So I think kind of echoing what Lee said, that's kind of what brings me joy.
Going down under me, Gabriel Resendez comes at this from a different angle. You're a personal trainer. Gabrielle, tell us about you and tell us about what brings you joy in the work you do.
Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel. I use he, she, and they pronouns. I don't technically have a preference, but I accept all three. What brings me joy is that fitness for me is more of like a mental thing. Like I continually try to make progress in every workout I do, and in turn, it actually has improved my mental health. And I'd like to be able to share my knowledge and be able to show that fitness is a platform for change, not only physically but also mentally and for emotional health.
And last on deck on our panel, but certainly not least, and wait a minute, we've got breaking news into our New Haven Pride Center News Center. Mountains all over New England are very happy that Raven Mathern is in this panel today and not climbing one of us. Raven Mathern, mountain climber, endurance athlete, martial artist. Tell us about you and tell us about what brings you joy in all the different things you've done and continue to do.
Thank you for that intro, Carly. So my name is Raven Mathern. My pronouns are she and they. In the sport, my profession or my vocation is I'm an elected official in Sanford City Council. There I'm vice chair of Parks and Rec, so I now get to help oversee and take care of the parks that I grew up running in and doing my recreation in, which is sort of where I get to with this panel, and that having access to the field of sports and athleticism when I was young and didn't know what I was going through with gender dysphoria gave me a different way to communicate with my body. So I owe the athletics my life. It gave me a language to talk to my body when I didn't have it. So yeah, that's my intro.
Well, one thing I want to stay with that point for a second. How, for all of you, and any of you just chime in at any time, how did sports figure into your transition? How did sports play into your process? How did it help you? Or if it did, how did it hurt you?
I guess I can. Oh, Raven, you're about to go.
I can go. I'll make it really quick. So when I was young, I was not out of the closet. I wasn't sure what the closet even was. All I knew was that I had a lot of personal issues that felt difficult to talk about with anybody, so I never talked about them. I got to, the one benefit to having been closeted was I got to experience sports as a young kid and not have to be told that I couldn't get involved in it. Like the door was open as long as I was in the closet, so to speak. But that in and of itself was able to give me a realm to basically be okay. Like I didn't have the elbow room to be okay with my gender, but I had the elbow room to express it and get that energy out elsewhere.
Like I said, this is a free for all. So if you want to jump in it, jump on in it.
Could you just repeat the question again, just so I understand it better?
Certainly. How did sports play into your own transition, into your journey? And how did it aid you? Or if it went the other way in some ways, where did it get difficult?
Oh, okay. So I guess I can give my input. Fitness for me really didn't become a thing until I actually started transitioning. Before I was actually that kid that would just sit there and play video games and watch like TV all the time. And then all of a sudden, like I just didn't really take care of my body in any way, shape, or form through physical activity, recreational, anything like that. It wasn't until transitioning like saved my life, and all of a sudden I started to really care about how I look, how I dressed, and all of a sudden I wanted to take care of my body, and that included like fitness, which was mostly lifting, and sometimes I really do enjoy like running long distances, and so that's where fitness plays in with my transition.
And JC, you were going to get in on this, so you might as well jump on in now.
I was going to say, it was like a really complex thing for me because I started competitive sports when I was really young, through junior competitive sports and curling, all the way up through adulthood. And so there was like this piece of me that kind of felt like a little held back from being able to like come into my own truths. And the older that I got, the more strong that like that feeling really became. But then kind of like a phoenix, you know, like I took a step back from sports in order to realize more of myself through sports. So it was kind of a really redemptive like situation where I stepped back from curling and was reintroduced through a very inclusive environment through roller derby. And so, you know, I started playing roller derby and was able to really come to my own and explore my identity in a relatively safe environment. And that played such a huge role in how I approached sports and strength sport in particular, considering the different kinds of audiences that are within strength sport. So yeah, it was both. It was kind of this, like, I wouldn't say like either or, but it was just this really complex experience of events in my life anyway.
Now, Liam, you also come from a very different perspectives that not only are you competing, you have someone's name on your chest when you do. As a collegiate athlete, what is it now? I mean, what is it not only meant for? How has sport not only added to your process, but also how is being a collegiate competitor also played into your transition?
It's interesting. My freshman year of college, you know, I contacted the coach over the summer. You know, I just disclosed, I said, you know, I'm transgender. It's not going to be a problem. She's like, no, it's fine. And I was like, great. And I'm very lucky that my coach is very supportive and that our athletic director is very supportive. And like the whole team was. But there's certain barriers, like, you know, just paperwork type things, that I had to submit a medical exemption for being on testosterone. And so I had my doctor fill out the paper, we submitted it, and we waited and waited for the NCAA to give us, you know, the go ahead for me to compete. And they just kept dragging their feet. We just didn't get anything in response. Then eventually they got back to us and they requested additional information on why I needed the testosterone, which like had already been explained. I'm transgender, and these were my testosterone levels beforehand, this after. So they asked for all the lab work I had before and after, up to like date, proving that like because I'm transgender, I naturally have no like testosterone. So we had to do all this, and I had to get all this information from my doctor and then submit it. By the time they like reviewed and approved my appeal, I had missed all but the last 2 races of the season, everything but our our regionals and our championships. And so it was a little bit frustrating start, because I felt like I still practiced with the team, with the men's team, and I still like was part of the team, but like each time it was time to race, I'd sit on like the bench, and that felt like how I had felt for too long. Like I wanted to be included. And even though, you know, it wasn't exactly anybody's fault, the school was very supportive. Like my coach was supportive, the athletic director, like, you know, even the NCAA did allow me to it, but it just felt like a little like, you know, frustrating way to start the year, especially because I hadn't anticipated that there would be any type of barrier, because there's a lot of, as I'm sure we'll get into later, a lot of people have questions about transgender athletes competing, but as somebody who's transitioning away from female towards male, I identify as non-binary, but that's roughly the medical transition I'm undertaking. Nobody's ever been concerned that I'm going to have some sort of biological advantage that other men don't have. And this is like, you know, we're getting into a whole other thing, but I had no like backlash on that. It was just the idea that there was going to be somebody doing something like testosterone, like that they just didn't have that kind of like, they weren't prepared for it in a way, even though I was not the first transgender athlete at all in this division. Although I might be in this sport, but like in our specific like conference, but like it was, so yeah. But I think overall, being able to finally do my first race, which was our regionals, finally being able to run with the rest of the team, and like it felt really great, even though at the time I don't think anything thought anything of it, but to me, it was a very like strong personal moment to be able to like show that we had managed to push it through, that I was finally part of it, just like anybody else, you know. So yeah.
Well, actually, Lee, following up, take me through that. What was it like for you to toe that line? You have your green and gold uniform on. You're ready to take it. You're ready to get out there. What, if you remember, take me back to that day. What was that feeling like to toe that line and realize when that horn goes off, I'm a Griffin. I'm really a Griffin now. I'm in the fray.
It was, I don't know, it was very exciting. I think, of course, there's always a little bit of like anxiety before the beginning of the race, because this was the first race I had ever raced on a men's team. As in high school, I had been racing with a woman pre medical transition. So it was not only like my first race as a Griffin, but the first race I had ever raced with men. So I think there was a lot of anxiety of like, am I going to live up to like, you know, I fought to be here. Do I deserve this place here? But I think when it got closer, you know, they count down. You can feel yourself like you just sort of focus, and then you just start running. And I think a lot of it is just letting, for me, like always letting that anxiety run away, because I feel like running is so calming and freeing that when you're running, you feel like you're not paying attention to your body and like how it looks. You're paying attention to how you function and how you're going. And so I felt like as soon as I started running, I felt comfortable, and I was like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And like, especially seeing people like my coach, and we had a few of our supporters there cheering. It felt like I was seen, and it was really a happy day for me. A happy day.
I was gonna say, like, what was that community support like while going through all of the hoops that the university was giving to you and the NCAA was giving to you, but then also like when you were actually able to compete, like what was that community support like?
I think it was interesting because I think a lot of people kind of felt badly for me, but they didn't see it in a way that I was seeing it. Like I felt like it was something that wouldn't happen if I was not transgender. And a lot of people were like, oh yeah, there are issues with all sorts of medication. Like people who take stimulants for ADHD have to, you know, get that cleared. And I was like, but it's not the same. They're not dealing with exactly the same thing here. So I felt like a lot of people kind of were supportive, but they didn't fully understand like why it mattered so much to me.
Right. They see it through this like strictly like therapeutic use like framework. Yeah, I totally get that same experience in powerlifting through the therapeutic use exemption process and having to get spironolactone approved. It's very much the same thing. People try to compare it to you know, medications for disorders and things like that, and it's just like that's not really what it is. It's just, you know, one piece of, you know, a larger portion of my transition. And it's just a very, very small piece. But yeah, no, I kind of, yeah.
I feel like often you have to almost in a way medicalize your body in order to get through, because they need to see that like they don't just believe what you're telling them about how you feel. You need to prove it, and you then need to get like a medication approved, prove that there's something wrong with you in order to need it. You can't just say, I need the testosterone because this is like what makes me feel like happier, congruent. You need to also then show like I need it because my doctor says there's this disorder and that, which I understand how it's important to avoid, you know, potential issues of like, you know, misuse of these medications. But it seems like it's an invalidating process.
Good word to bring up, because for all, I mean, this is for all of you. Gabrielle, I especially want you to ring in on this one, but how much in your mind, with all the issue-driven talk that there is about trans people in sports and trans and fitness, do you feel one of the things, for example, when you're working with a client, especially a trans client, one of the first things you have to do is kind of bring the humanity back into it before you can bring the athleticism into it?
Yeah, no, actually, I actually spoke with a couple of clients and they were very forthright in telling me they feel more comfortable speaking to someone that's of trans experience in terms of like, fitness and, navigating dysphoria and like what the body's and, being very sensitive to people's dysphoria, what makes them feel really good about themselves, what have they done, what keeps them going. And so when we talk about like in our calls, like when they first sign up with me, like I'm talking about like what makes you feel safe, what kind of workouts do you see yourself doing? Like, do you have any pain? Is there anything that might make you feel uncomfortable? Like, how can I best help you? Because I need to like work with you. Like, we need to work together to help succeed with your goals. And that kind of like brings the humanity back. It's more of like getting to know them as a person, what drives them, and like as trans people, like how can I best like help you with like your goals and in terms of like combating dysphoria. And then we start going over like workouts, like what would best help them towards their goals. But first we're talking about like our trans bodies.
Anyone else want to ring in on that?
I mean, it's so important that we're able to like encapsulate those safe, or like to really bring about those safe spaces. And then when I say that, I mean like spaces that have people that are understanding and understand trans bodies and trans issues. That way we can like open up and do physical activity where we're encapsulating our own bodies. It's a very, I mean, fitness, strength, any activity, it's a very vulnerable thing to do. And to do it in spaces that are like cis heteronormative and like just cis het dominant is a very vulnerable thing to do. So to have resources like Gabrielle was talking about, and like being able to have space to talk about your body and with an understanding person to achieve goals, or to like look at goals and to set goals. I mean, that's really the difference between a really, really good experience and one that could, impact someone and make them not want to come back, or make them not want to participate. So I think that's like really, really important.
Now, with that in mind, for all of you, as you're competing, or as you're working out, or as you're finishing an Ironman barefoot, or climbing a mountain, or getting in that lifting platform, do you even think about being trans? Does trans even come into your head? Has it ever?
I'll go first. So for me, like when I'm going out to the platform, or I'm just like working out in general, which could involve barbell circuits or cardio, like I'm not really thinking about me being trans. It's probably like the only time in like a day-to-day basis where I'm not really thinking about being trans. I'm just someone who's pretty much processing the whole week's like troubles, like, oh, I have to pay this bill, but like it's like a way for me to like process my feelings in a very private setting. So I like to work out alone. It's like the 1 hour to myself where I'm like, I get to take care of myself.
Raven, I saw you wanted to get in on this one.
So I think that, and I kind of spoke to this a little bit earlier, I think that unfortunately many trans people are given messages by modern society that teaches us to have a very unhealthy relationship with our bodies. Like messaging in cis het culture is just that trans people are some sort of deformed, or some sort of ill, or some sort of medical malady. And as trans people that are also on the receiving end of those messages, it's all too common that we just have an incredibly unhealthy relationship, and also unrealistic relationship with our own bodies. I think having access to athleticism gives trans people the opportunity to actually work on that relationship. And if given a safe space to do that in, if I can not get tongue tied here, a safe space to do that work within, where they're not going to necessarily be affected by being trans in any way, and they're able to just hone in on, this is my relationship with my body. I think cis people take that for granted, or cis het people get to take that for granted, and trans people just don't.
Yeah, I think what you said like resonates with me a lot. And I think there's a lot of times, like, because I'm transgender, that's something that's always present with me. That's something that I'm always taking with me as part of like who I am. But it's also not necessarily something I'm constantly thinking about. Like, you know, not like, I am now doing my transgender dishes and like folding my transgender laundry and running my transgender mile, you know? It's like, it definitely informs a lot of my experiences, how people interact with me. But like, I still think of myself as me and like my body as my body. But I've had like, I think like it's something you have to get to that point by like unlearning a lot of like messages that like what you said, like about how society expects people, especially transgender people, to almost be held to like a different or higher standard, and like proving that you're super masculine enough to be seen as a man, or proving that you're feminine enough to be seen as like a woman. And then for non-binary people, oh boy, just there are no standards and people lose their minds. But I think oftentimes when you enter into especially a gendered competition environment, where you're going into like a men's room or a woman's locker room competing with like a men's team or like a woman's team, it becomes something that's more noticeable to you than when you're like working out alone, because you're being in that gendered environment is like inherently either like kind of reinforcing or sort of detracting away from what your own stated gender identity is. So I think like there are times when like, you know, when this summer like our team did like I guess it was last summer pre-COVID, but we did like a pool workout, and I don't usually go in locker rooms if I can avoid it, but I remember winding through the men's locker room and thinking like, oh, I'm in here. And for that moment, I was very conscious of it before, you know, you get into the activity and you're just back to doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it's like really dependent on the space that you're navigating at any given moment. Like there are some gyms locally here that when I walk in, I'm very aware that I'm trans, and mostly it's because of the experiences that I've had within the powerlifting community here locally. But that's not because of me, and I think that's one thing that we really need to talk about and like teach within our practices is like is letting especially trans youth know that these issues they're not because of you, you know, it's because of other people's like insecurities and because of the ways that you're navigating, but also like remember our issue, it's other people's issue that
the issues, the debate. What's your thoughts on that? Gut reaction.
What debate? Like, it's such a small group of people that get so riled up and so angry and is so uninformed. To categorize it as a debate almost puts them on a soapbox that they're not actually capable of taking of their own accord.
Yeah. You know, I feel like something people always talk about is like fairness. They're like, is this fair to the cisgender athletes? And I think when you think about something like competition like this, is that people are approaching naturally with some biological advantages. There are people who are just naturally going to have like, you know, strong muscles no matter what. There are people who are going to be short. There are going to be people who come at this with all sorts of things. And so if there's somebody who's like born with, you know, asthma, they're already at a natural disadvantage. And it's not that we should say, all right, well, how about we make a special, like, you know, exemption? Like everybody who doesn't have asthma gets to, like, you know, compete only if they then lower themselves to that ability of everyone else. I think it kind of like we have to accept that there are certain things we can do to try and make, you know, sports in some way fair, but we also have to admit, like, even if there is a difference biologically after somebody has transitioned in some way, I don't think that should be considered any different than any other natural biological advantage somebody might have, because certain great athletes are great because they practice, because they train, but because their bodies are naturally really adept at being able to do whatever that sport is. And so if somebody's like a great swimmer because, you know, they have like the ability to hold their breath really long and maybe they have like extra large like feet, I don't know, maybe like that's their advantage. And I think that would be completely normalized. But when all of a sudden we bring being transgender into it, it becomes very taboo because of the way transgender identity is stigmatized. And so somebody says, oh, well, a transgender woman might be extra tall. Well, there are extra tall cisgender women, and that's not a concern until all of a sudden we bring in the concept of like gender and like biological sex, and that's where a lot of transgender and intersex athletes get caught up. And I think the most people, like the people who are most targeted, are women, because I know some transgender women who are athletes, and I've had frustrating experiences at times. But like I mentioned, I think the brunt of the scrutiny is not on me, because people don't think I am a threat or have an advantage compared to cisgender men. And so I feel like the people who are the most affected by this kind of debate are usually trans feminine people, even though transphobia does affect all of us and makes things harder for all of us. It seems like when people are arguing about this, what they're really arguing about is specifically like trans feminine people and nobody else. Yeah.
Right. There's this like inherent sexism that's involved, where it's like, in order to be trans exclusionary, you have to be both trans misogynist and sexist. There isn't one without the other. And I think it's really interesting, like watching these arguments like unfold and thinking to myself, all the ways in which, when cis women are advocating against trans women participating, how they're really oppressing themselves. And that comes up time and time again. I just think that's really interesting.
Now, for all of you, we have a question from the comments. What are your thoughts on sex-segregated sports in general?
So I think we start getting into the problem when we start saying the word segregated. I mean, we have to start getting a little bit more in depth on how you want to define that segregation. And once you, like, it's something that so many people would think is simple and say, okay, put the boys over here and the girls over here and we'll all work out well. The problem is you have to choose where you want to put that line, and there's nowhere to put that line that works. And as you keep trying to say, oh, is it chromosomes? Oh, is it hormones? Oh, is it gender identity? Like, the more places you try to find a cozy place to put this line, the more you realize that there is no good place to put the line. Gender is a spectrum, and we're trying to force it into a binary for competitive pursuits. It's a messy system, and it clearly shows. And unfortunately, it's trans people that catch the brunt end of this.
Now, an offshoot to that is because now it's not just, I mean, this is not just a binary thing. For example, next year, we could see the first competitors who are trans in an Olympics and a Paralympics. And one of them has come out as non-binary openly right out of the gate. How, in your mind, how is sports going to look as we attempt to integrate non-binary people into it? How can sports continue as it is under this framework and have that integration? Or is it going to change? What will it look like? What do you think?
I mean, I think there needs to be a fundamental reimagining of the framework in which we like approach sports, definitely, and it starts with conversations like these. I think right now it's a very complex situation, because there's so many people that are holding on to this binary notion of what sports is, because it was so hard fought for, because of a system that excluded anyone that didn't have close proximity to white cisness. So I think that, it's definitely going to take a fundamental shift in like how we understand sports and how we understand gender to get to a place that really fully encapsulates all people and participation for everyone.
Now, JC, you've been in many ways in the warhead of this, and I want to follow up with you real quick. At what point in the struggles you've had the last few years, and even now, At what point does it just frustrate you? That it just makes you want to throw up your hands and say, "Will you people just let me compete, and otherwise just shut your mouth?"
At many points, I think I've gotten to that point several times. I might not show it publicly, but I do use it. I use that energy that I feel and I put it into like my workouts, into like recovery, into, working on injury, and working with others and like passing along the information that I've learned through my experiences to other generations. But yeah, like I definitely get to that point where it's just like, why do I have to be the athlete advocate? And I think what I come back to every time is that I do have the space and the privilege to even be an advocate in the first place. And so it would be like a misuse of power if I didn't at least do something. I think that's what I always come back to.
Let's say Lee you had something to add?
Oh, just one thing, which is you're at a different level than someone like me. And I think that's something that people like you make it possible for people like me to run. For people who aren't particularly remarkable, people who aren't necessarily going to, win at any competitions. But I think people who reach that kind of recognition are more scrutinized than people, who kind of like aren't necessarily flying as high. So I just would like to thank you for all of your work, because I know it's difficult to put yourself out there like that. But like, you are helping so many people who are younger and who want to see themselves in somebody. So yeah.
Thanks for that. I mean, like, also, like, thank you for, just putting yourself out there and pursuing your dreams and like actualizing like your place, your rightful place within sport. I don't think that like, what I'm doing is any, more impactful or less impactful than just existing and really taking up space. I think that that's really important.
We just had a comment from one of our viewers that said we need to smash the system. With that in mind, let's say that the system gym has come up to you right now and say, "Look, our gym is too cis. We want to be we want to be a place where everybody can work out and everybody can get better and everybody can reach their potential. Okay, I'm cis and I don't know a dang thing. How can I make my gym space, my workout space safer?"
I guess I'd like to chime in. After working with a couple of my clients, I think the biggest thing is a lot of, at bare minimum, it definitely has to start with the staff first, before we start making any physical changes, like restructuring like bathrooms into like gender neutral bathrooms would be ideal. But I think like trans sensitivity trainings and non-binary trainings would like be very helpful, and like asking pronouns, like normalizing that, basically stuff that usually happens when people are like educating like cis people, like let's normalize pronouns, put them in your bio, put them in your Zoom display name and everything. So I think it needs to happen with the staff first before we start talking about like gender neutral bathrooms and like instead of men, women locker rooms, maybe like private like stalls for changing in the locker rooms. I think all that needs to happen.
I also think like creating our own spaces is a really good way to do that as well, because I think those little pieces and the little nuances of like what it means to be trans and like how we navigate conversations, even like I think that within our own spaces that are created by and for us, like I think that we're going to be more attentive to like our needs, really.
I think the other thing is being preemptive. I think some people have this attitude of like, oh, I support a trans person when they come along. So, I don't need to do anything yet until that trans person comes along, but you don't necessarily know who is trans and who is not. And so oftentimes people kind of would say like, oh, if I knew a trans person was here and they wanted to use this restroom or whatever, then I would say I'd be proactive about it. But you don't necessarily know. So I think making a show of being supportive is important, because people think it's just like, it doesn't matter unless that trans person is there to witness you being supportive. But it's important because it helps the allies, recruit other allies. You need to be supportive when a trans person is not in the room, because it tells other people, hey, respecting trans people is important. And it tells maybe the trans person who is in the room, who hasn't come out of the closet or who is living stealth, that you're somebody who's safe to talk to. And so even things like, putting the LGBT flag symbols or something, making small visuals cues or statements is something that people can start doing, because you don't necessarily realize that your space isn't inclusive, but by not making any sort of statement at all, that's being exclusive, because people are so scared a lot of the time that until they're explicitly told this is a safe space, they often just assume that it isn't. And so you have to take that extra step. And hopefully you take that extra step so that when the trans person comes, then they'll be ready and they'll feel welcome. So you don't wait until you have a trans person, then you start thinking, oh, how do I make these policies? You want to figure this all out dry run before. And if you're not sure, then of course ask a trans person, because I think most trans people or organizations will be happy to help somebody who's looking. So a lot of people think I don't know where to start, and where you can start is by reaching out. You don't have to do it yourself.
Right, and there's so many resources about creating more inclusive spaces that are out there. Decolonizing fitness is the first thing that comes to my brain, and all the work that Ilya has done to create manuals for creating more inclusive fitness spaces. It's it feels like when gyms have they have a want to make an inclusive space, but they don't realize that, like Lee said, they don't have to recreate an entire curriculum for how to do it. There are resources and things that are out there from really brilliant people and trans people at that have been doing this work for a really long time.
Now, one thing, not only is it important to make those structures within, say, a gym, but also the structures and in turn of our body politic and our laws. And Raven, you've worked a great deal in that, especially in this last year, especially with the battles over the threats to trans student athletes in regards to funding from the Department of Education. How important was it to get lawmakers involved, and get lawmakers involved before the controversy happened, before the contest happened?
Of the utmost importance. I try, when I try to talk to people that are not of the queer community, I always sort of make the analogy like this. Imagine if a bunch of people got together to write laws on how to ride bikes on the roadway, and no one in that group knew how to ride a bike. Would they come up with good laws, or would a lot of cyclists get killed? Well, we have a bunch of people in a room making laws and regulations for a bunch of trans people right now, and there are no trans people in the room. And it's the same outcome. So when we talk about laws and regulation, unfortunately, trans people are just underrepresented in this. I didn't find out that I was the first trans elected lawmaker in the state until after I was elected. And it was oh, I'm getting all these people calling me about, wanting to talk to me and write reports. I'm finally, I'm bringing attention to the streets I need to get paved, and they want to talk about my gender. It was just, that's a whole different story that we can set aside for now. But unfortunately, the attention that we get brought to trans athletes from outside of the community is typically not good attention. It's not informed attention. And we don't have enough people in the room right now writing these rules, laws, and regulations from a position of understanding that experience. It's how we get results where we have people looking at the paper and saying, well, okay, you're trans. What's your medication status? We're going to let you compete depending on your medication status. Again, I could rant and rave, and there are much better people in this group for these purposes than I, but currently our regulatory body is simply ill-informed, and you're never going to be able to get a good result out of an ill-informed body.
Let's take a look at it on the positive side too, because some things that have happened in the last year. Take the negativity aside. Last year in the NCAA, first individual national champion who's a transgender student athlete. This year, the first transgender male athlete to qualify for and compete in Olympic trials. Also, the first trans feminine athlete to compete in Olympic trials. We have the possibility of perhaps there are 3 known athletes in the world right now who could be competing next year in Tokyo in the Olympic Games who are trans. There are 2 Paralympians in the world right now who have already qualified for the Paralympics who are trans. How important would that be for our community? And how do you think it will be received by our community to see them stepping in the starter's blocks or stepping in the ring or stepping in wherever in Tokyo next summer? And Raven, I want you to answer that first.
I think we take for granted how radical it is to take it upon yourself to try to do something that has never been done before, under any context. Trans or not, no matter what, it is always going to be radical to step forward and try and do something that's never been done before. It's unfortunate because I don't think that a key to being successful as a trans person should be reliant on your willingness to be a radical. Unfortunately, it is the case right now because we don't have enough positive trans representation right now. I didn't grow up with a transgender athlete that I could look at and say, oh, I can go run in the woods and be comfortable in my body and do all those things. That didn't exist. So it's impossible to visualize. You have to sort of materialize it yourself. And that's a tall ask for anybody. I am saddened for the people in our community that have not been able to make up that tall ask, but that were definitely deserving of it.
I wonder, follow up, what's it like for you when people look up to you? Because you're an elected official, you kick butt. I'm one of the people who looks up to you. I will say that right here, right now. What's it like for you? And that's for all of you. What's it like for you when people look at you and say, hey, I see you, fellow trans person, kicking butt. I'm looking up to you. I want to emulate you. I want to take something from you and run with it.
I guess I'll answer that.
Actually, let Raven finish that one.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry, I can make it quick. So my initial reaction to that is I don't think people should be looking up to me. I that feels ridiculous from my perspective.
Too bad. I look up to you too, just to let you know, Raven.
I have 2 arms. I have 2 legs. I breathe oxygen and eat food just like everybody else here. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Well, I was able to take a situation that was bad and turn it positive because I was able to come up with a plan and follow it. As far as I'm aware, that's what makes a successful weightlifter. That's what makes a successful track and field participant. That's what makes a great personal trainer that's able to connect with clients. These are the qualities that you need to be able to make progress. I don't think anyone should be looking up to me. There's no reason. Anybody can do any of this stuff. Don't look up to me, be the next me.
Gabriel, how about you?
I actually agree with everything that Raven has said because I actually wear many hats. I actually run a group with support group on Facebook that's actually has trans people from all over the world. So people apparently look up to me as a community manager. People look up to me as a social media gender fluid influencer. So before personal training, I was all of these things. I'm also coordinator for a trans program at a nonprofit. So I work with trans clients directly as well. So I kind of wear many hats. So a lot of people would send me messages. Oh, I look up to you. You're doing great work. And I kind of feel the same way with Raven. I'm just your everyday person. I just do what I can with the resources I have. I just truck along. I've definitely risen above so much trauma that I had as a child that I just had to do what I needed to do to survive. And, it's nothing inspirational. Anybody could do it. As wonderful as the compliments are, it makes me feel flustered.
We have to celebrate each other. I just love I love this conversation, but I want to celebrate everyone that's on here because each of us just brings so much to our community and yeah, just so much love. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm feeling the love right here. Glad to be a part of this, but for all of you, there could be somebody watching right now. And actually, before we even get into that, now I'm just wondering for all of you, is there somebody in your process or just in general that perhaps you look up to, that you kind of saw as a goal to emulate and you took it and ran with it?
I kind of want to backtrack to the last question for a second. So I don't know how much y'all know about my story, but at one point we staged a protest at the Minnesota State Championships here and for USA powerlifting because they banned trans athletes from being able to compete. I don't want to focus on that piece. What I do want to focus on is, you know, while we were chanting share the platform, while people were timing out their lifts, you know, there was a gender nonconforming kid that was in the bleachers, and we would chant, and then while anyone that was actually taking a lift, we would all sit down and be quiet and cheer that person on. So in between chanting and then like sitting down, I went and sat down next to this visibly gender nonconforming kid, and they turned to me and they were like, y'all are so brave and amazing, like for doing this. And like, you know, I think at the time, like it didn't really register like how important it is to like be in a space and, you know, show that we exist and in a way that's positive and that's like surrounded by community and that's like with so much support. But I think looking back, it kind of like chokes me up a little bit thinking about, you know, someone at that age had experience of like sitting there and then like watching all this occur and like knowing the power that we have as people, you know, and the things that we can do. Like, yeah. I'm like crying now.
No, I remember that, seeing the stories of everybody saying share the platform, share the platform. I mean, but back to that question just quickly for all of you, was there somebody in your process, be it as an athlete going through your transition, or even not necessarily not, that you looked up to and said, you know, that's something to shoot at, that's something to emulate, I want to see what I can take those best parts and run with it? Was there anyone?
You know, I think for me, when I was in high school, I started out in sports in high school. And then when I came out as transgender, my sophomore year, I stopped competing because I didn't want to choose like which binary team to compete on for a while, because I didn't feel like I was going to be able to run with a team that I felt like I comfortable on. And so I think for me, like, it was like watching other people who continued on through that process. I think often for a lot of people, the most awkward stage is when you're right at the beginning, you're kind of starting right in between, and you're trying to figure out like how to like gracefully, almost, it's never graceful, but gracefully cross that divide. You have been on the other side for so long. I think watching other people manage to do it was really inspiring for me. But I think like for so many people, it's hard when you don't know anybody yourself who's doing it in person, because you can sometimes, very rare occasions, read in the newspaper something positive, but you often like don't feel like you see it. Like, you know, there's nobody who you can think of yourself who you've ever met. And so it's that sense of like almost being disconnected from your community. You're sort of aware that the community's out there. You're hearing about them. You sort of know that they're there, but you're almost untethered. You don't actually see them. You don't know who they are. You're just, you know, they're there somewhere. So meeting somebody who's done it and being like, oh, all right. And then one day you realize that for somebody, you are that person. Like, it's a very interesting thing, because I feel like for me, I didn't realize when I had successfully um, crossed over and become comfortable, like in my own place, like felt like I was in my, like where I belonged in a way. Like I feel like oftentimes you don't realize until you look back that like you used to feel that way and now you don't. There's just that sort of like, I don't know, it's an invisible like point of transition, and that's a mental transition as well. And so I think seeing other people anywhere, like locally, like they don't need to be, like the star of whatever. Just saying like there's a kid in 2 towns over who's doing this helps it feel concrete. So it doesn't matter what they end up doing. The fact that they're out there and they're doing it, that's what matters.
I can tell you that. I mean, that means a lot. And I want to share a little bit of a story where the first time I was able to play on a team as my authentic self, I was on a team for the trans people. And I know what Raven says. You don't necessarily shouldn't necessarily look up to them. But I did. I looked up to my teammates, because what I saw was people that, yeah, they may have stumbled at points, and they may be going through their own deal as far as transition, but I saw their secureness within self, especially in that space on that ball field, as so much of a good example for me that I just took it, including one point in particular, because I mean, sports in many ways. It's weird for me because participating in sports helps me fight my dysphoria and it triggers it at the same time. So there's a lot that goes into it. Now, there was a particular game where I was playing in a new position. I'm not a very good softball player to begin with, and I am just having the day from hell. And I'm retrogressing back to like 11 years old, and I was a competitive little bugger at 11 years old. And this person came up to me and said, "Listen, you can't get down yourself. There's 9 other people out here. And more importantly, you are the heart of this team. If you put your head down, everyone else out here is." And that person was a pick-me-up when I needed it, not just from the standpoint of being an athlete, but also from a standpoint of my dysphoria is at the red line, because all the doubts and the fears are going back and they're creeping into my head. And the one thing that gave me solace was sports. And I'm screwing up in that. And this person help me hit the reset switch. And this person has relative proximity to this panel. I'm not going to say any more than that, but it was Raven. Okay. It was Raven. Okay. Can turn red now, but those sorts of things. Yeah. Go. Yeah. Shout out to our New Haven Barracudas. But since we're coming into the home stretch anyway, that example leads me to a question. Somewhere right now, there is that person who felt that maybe the way Lee felt at the beginning, that for me to do this, I may have to give up the sports thing to this transition thing. But you don't have to, and you shouldn't. If you love sports, you shouldn't. What is one thing you would tell that person who came up to you and said, how can I make transition and sport work? Because I love me enough to want to transition, and I love sports enough that I want to keep competing. How do I make it happen?
So one thing I'd say is you don't have to disappear. I think a lot of times people will take themselves away until they feel like they have to cocoon up and disappear before they can emerge out of a butterfly. And you don't need to do that. It's okay if people see the awkward bits. It's okay if you're not fully there. If you're growing out your hair and it's halfway done, or you've got like 3 beard hairs. Some of us do. I think you have to let yourself take up space, even when you don't feel that you're ready to, because eventually you will grow into that space. And so I think letting yourself be there is the most important step, because people don't always feel like they are like they deserve that space, and they always do. And I think the other thing is making sure that if possible, you find a welcoming space that will accept you who you are, your full self, because I feel like part of the issue, I feel that tension at times when I tell people like, you know, go do it, go join sports, like people will like accept you can do it, and people go out and they get rejected, they get told, you know, you can't be here, and that does happen. And so I think it's difficult because you're telling people like you might be put into a situation where you're going to be discriminated against, but like have at it. And so you have to balance that, like put your safety first and all that. But I think the other thing is remembering that that isn't everybody, and that there will be somewhere, someday, somebody that where you can be yourself, and so you shouldn't give up on it, because so many people feel like, you know, oh, in middle school I wasn't accepted, so now I can't. It's too late for me, and it's never too late. It's never too late to transition. It's never too late to get back into doing sports, and it's just never too late to like find your place. So I think that the most important thing is letting yourself go into that place, and then just just working to be the best you can at what you're doing, and letting it go from there.
What else is there to say? That was great, Lee.
Well, if anybody else has anything to add before we close this out, feel free, because I must say it's been an honor having you all here.
Yeah, find community, find each other, you know, reach out to one of us, you know.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Not to hijack what you said earlier, Carly, but that was kind of going to be my answer for a role model. Like, I couldn't put my finger on one person. The biggest thing for me was being around other trans people and seeing that it was possible. It's too easy to go into that cocoon, like you said, Lee, and like you forget that other trans people exist in there. And it's finding a support group, finding people that you can talk to about this stuff. Better yet, people you can do push-ups with or run with or lift weights with, even better. But like finding that supportive group, people that are going to affirm who you are and not make you feel like you have to be defensive just in breathing.
And I was pleased to have that.
I guess I'll just have like this closing comment. I mean, in the beginning, before I transitioned, I did have like one person that I looked up to, and I guess we fall into this trap of like, putting them on a pedestal. But as I started to get more confident with myself, I was like, they're doing great things. They just happen to be trans, and they're just like everyone else. And so I started to like tear myself away of like the idea of role models and just being my own person. And I guess ironically speaking, it turned me into a role model for other people as well. Go figure.
I'll tell you that at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about. We just each one teach one, and we work for each other. And I want to thank you all for being a part of this panel, because the beauty of this is the humanity was brought out. It was less debate. It was more humanity, and it's exactly what we wanted. And all this week, all the different panels that we've had through all the Trans Awareness Week programming leading up to today's Transgender Day of Remembrance have been in this vein where we've gone beyond just the issues and gone into the people, what this is really about. And just a reminder, in a little bit less than 90 minutes from now is a Trans Day of Remembrance vigil on the New Haven Green. If you're able to come out, please do. Please do. And also, please bring your mask. Please. Mask up, people. I mean, let's continue to flatten the curve. But also, if you like the programming that you've seen this week, now it hasn't been a better time to give to the New Haven Pride Center. This past year has been a difficult year for venues like the NHPC across the country because of the COVID crisis. And at a time when many of our spaces have had to shut down and scale back, the New Haven Pride Center has neither shut down nor scaled back. They've expanded their reach, expanded their scope, and they've done more. They've shown a lot of grit in doing it. And right now is a great time to give, because they're in the middle of a major match initiative. And with more on that is our executive director, Patrick Dunn. Patrick?
I muted again every time. Hey, Carly, everybody. Thank you so much to you all for being here and being part of today's program. Every time that we do a panel specifically on trans athletes and trans in sports, it's every time I learn so much more about both how to be a better trans ally myself, but generally just hearing your experiences, I get very emotional every time, so I'm gonna reel them in. But thank you all for being here with us today. As Carly mentioned, we are in the middle of a major match campaign. We were very fortunate. We were one of 8 organizations nationally to receive a grant to be able to be matched, and we're trying to match it by December 31st. We just the other day surpassed the 10,000 mark, which is a very important milestone. And in this marathon, we need your help. So if you have an extra $1, $2, or $5, right now, if you give, it becomes 2, 4, 10. So consider going to newhavenpridecenter.org/match. These funds will go to support our programming, expanding our services, and most importantly, paying experts like the people on these panels who we are able to pay for their time, their energy, and everything that they do. And with that, I'm going to exodus and let Carly give the last word.
There's no last word that can match the great words that I've heard from this entire panel. But I will say this to that next one who could be watching right now. The next Cece Telfer, the next Chris Mosier, the next Megan Youngren, the next Mitch Harrison, the next Valentina Petrillo, the next Chelsea Wolfe, the next J.C. Cooper, the next Lee Brown, the next Gabriel Resendez, the next Raven Mathurin. If you're looking for them, you won't have to look far. You only need to look in a mirror. That person could very well be you. I'm Carly Webb for all of us at the New Haven Pride Center. Good night, everybody, and remember, it's not just Transgender Day of Remembrance. Let it also be Transgender Day of Rededication to our common resistance and liberation. Good night, everybody.